You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Hi, this is me, Tammy Lynn Beaverdorf, and these are my memoirs, in case we don't get out of here alive.
The borderline so narrow between human desires and animal acts marked these people for destruction. Sown in hatred, sown in lust, blossomed to deeds so horrifying. Self-inflicted pain filled with the true pleasures of torture marked their every moment. Alan and Rosalie Bazzini present a film so unbelievably real, proving that the most savage animal on earth is man.
But since everything they're saying about us is a pack of lies, I'd like to take this chance to set the record straight.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
We are seeing dead people and making friends with Bruce Willis. Join the sleaze.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for over 3 years. There's something like 90, I think, bonus episodes now, which is crazy. We're getting close to 100. It's feeling kind of wild. But for anyone who hasn't made the jump, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. There's lots of episodes waiting for you. And speaking of which, due to a little time travel maneuvering, as we sometimes do on this show, we recorded a bunch of episodes in advance so I could do a brief move. Because of that, we have a very, very long list of patrons to thank. Sorry that it took so long, because some of you pledged literally a month ago, and I just haven't been able to get around to them yet. So we didn't forget about any of you. But speaking of which, I am going to list those names out now. We have Plapp. We have Diego Duckenfield Lopez. We have Andy Mitchell, Brendan Carroll, Ziltoid Lives, Kazaya, Celine, Kyle Mayers, Logan Kirk, Stephen Masso, Aiden McGuire, Jack, Harrison Rees. Oh my God, I'm still going. B-Ben, Ryan Pierce. We had Connor Willingham, who actually upgraded from his $5 a month to $10 a month. He's going to be joining us for the monthly virtual screenings that Jamie and I both do live, where we watch a movie live with you guys. Nice. Don't know exactly what that movie is yet, but it's always fun. Oh yeah. We also had Dennis Duffy sign up, Samuel Can. All right, partner, keep on rolling, baby. Y'all know what time it is. Thanks to our friend there. All right, Ryan Chang, Luckman, Volgtech Taluk, Joseph Mellon, Mopo, Daniel Olson, and Thrillho. So awesome. Thanks so much. Normally, I guess we're only reading out about a week's name. So this was a month. I hope you guys have been enjoying all the bonus episodes over the last month. And thanks for supporting the show. Yeah,
thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, that's the one plug for the week. The other plug is, as always, Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I see the stats, I know that you are. I see you right now listening on Apple Podcasts. Right at this very moment, scroll down to the very bottom while you're listening to this and give us a good old rating review down at the bottom there. It helps us climb the ranks at iTunes and find new listeners. And then the very last plug is merch. If you guys like the poster art that horror artist Trevor Henderson, based out of Toronto, did for the show, you can get that put on in basically anything you want. You can get it put on a shirt. You can get it put on a hoodie, a notebook, a pillow. You can just get a poster if that's what you're interested in. I have one for my house.
Yeah, me too.
You can scroll down to the description, and you can find a link to the merch there, and you can also find it at sleazoidspodcast.com. All right, there's the intro. Welcome back. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, it feels kind of crazy. That's the longest break Jamie and I have ever taken from the show. I know it didn't feel like a break to you guys because we were, still dropping episodes every week, but we just took about a month off from the show. We recorded a bunch of episodes in advance. I hope it didn't show that we were getting tired by the end there. I think our long goodbye Big Lebowski episode was still pretty good, despite the fact that we were both, our brains were hurting.
Yeah, still a good 2.5 hour episode. So as is tradition,
we couldn't stop ourselves. Yep. We can't stop ourselves. But speaking of which, I think for you guys listening this week, 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you guys, free listeners, would have heard from us, and we would have had special guest, returning guest Nick Usen on, as well as a mob scholar and mob enthusiast on to talk about mob movies. We talked Across 110th Street from 1973, directed by Barry Shear. And we also talked about Donnie Brasco from 1997 with Al Pacino and Johnny Depp, and both for Nick were kind of like underrated, maybe kind of like the B side of mob movies. Even though Donnie Brasco obviously still a very handsome production, it's just not held in similar esteem to the Scorsese gangster pictures, for example. So we kind of had fun exploring some of getting Nick's insights on some of the actual mob stories that he's read and the history that he's read, and both movies were surprisingly a little more depressingly accurate rather than exciting when it comes to mob movies. If you didn't hear that episode, that was 2 weeks ago. That was any podcast listener of choice. And as I already mentioned, last week's episode was your guys' Patreon voted episode, where for anyone who's not a patron, we let the patrons vote on the double feature about for an episode once every 2 months. Speaking of which, for anyone who hasn't signed up or hasn't made their way over to the Patreon recently, the next voting is going down right now. There's a lot of nominations being thrown out there, a lot of arguing. So head on over to the Patreon if you want to vote on the next one.
Do you know the top couple yet on the voting block?
It looks like so far. I mean, I can't say 100% because we've had some upsets in the past.
For sure.
But the leading double feature right now is a Tony Scott double feature of Last Boy Scout and The Fan.
Oh, I would be happy. I'm just saying.
So that's currently in the lead, but as always, there's a lot of voting that takes place, and so we do a double round where people vote, and then we take the top 4 and we have them vote again. So every once in a while there's an upset. Speaking of which, like the upset that happened last week, where there was a very close run between 36 Chamber of Shaolin and 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, which looked like it was going to win, and then out of just nowhere, The Long Goodbye Big Lebowski just took it. And that was what we talked about last week over on the Patreon, a big 2.5 hour episode on sort of easygoing, lackadaisical detectives stuck in the wrong decade, which was a lot of fun to talk about. But that being said, welcome back to another week here on the show. Moving on to this week, once again, just so everyone knows, because we are recording, much later than the previous episodes, I figured I should warn everyone, because I'm in a new place, the sirens are gone. Yes. So for anyone who had some Stockholm syndrome and was getting really used to hearing, feeling like you were being pulled over by the cops, like every 40 minutes of an episode, that no longer is going to happen. I might ask Jamie to throw in some
a little post.
We might have a transition period where he pulls some from some old episodes and he just throws them in every so often, and we'll see what happens there. So things might sound a little bit different moving forward, but I think it'll be a good different. To join us for this new era of a sirenless Sleazoids, we have one of I think the very first patron the show ever had. Very early supporter, someone who's nominated a lot of episodes and recommendations that we've actually eventually done on the show, including some of our nastiest ones, including our episode that we did on The Last House on the Left.
Yeah, and I've probably stolen a point or two as well.
Or sorry, no, Last House on a Dead End Street. I always get those titles mixed up because they start that way.
I was honored by the choices and the stealing.
But we have joining us this week. He is a film writer and a programmer based out of Melbourne. We have joining us Kai Perrignon, which is the first time I've ever pronounced his name correct on this show, even though he has been brought up multiple times.
Yeah, it's a hard to say name. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. I knew eventually that we were going to have you on because you kept giving us recommendations all of the time.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the time when you were giving us recommendations, it was stuff that I hadn't even heard of. Now, luckily this week I had actually heard and seen one of the films that you wanted to bring on this week, but you didn't disappoint with the second one. So as it goes, Kai, you know the drill. We have the guests bring on the double feature with them. So what two films have you brought with you this week, and why do they pair together?
This week I brought Andy Milligan's 1968 masterpiece Seeds, and I brought James Robert Baker's 1984 masterpiece Blonde Death. They are, on the surface, maybe they're not that similar. They are shot, obviously, in very different eras and in very different places. Seeds shot in Staten Island, Blonde Death shot in Los Angeles, Blonde Death shot on video, Seeds shot on... Actually, I thought I wrote this down, but I didn't.
16 millimeter.
16. It looks really bad.
Yes.
I say it in a good way. I say it's a compliment. But I think that both of these movies are basically about two family units completely imploding, and they implode through people screaming like really dark bon mots at each other and saying really awful things to each other about incest and implicit class critiques and sexuality. And I find them both to be very cathartic expressions of rage from two very angry and confused young queer artists. I think that they especially upon rewatching them this week, I was really blown away by how similar they are. Just like the tone is the different thing I felt mainly, and the violence.
Yeah, like despite the completely different look and sort of like in terms of how they were shot and kind of the setting of them, there is definitely kind of like this very angry, transgressive attitude to the both of them that definitely links them. Mm-hmm.
And even like the 16 and the video, like Milligan is like he's shooting it relatively straightforwardly, even as he occasionally will swirl the camera around. And I think some of that video fuzziness of Blonde Death really gets into some similar territory.
Definitely. Yeah, both are handheld shot nightmares with lots of yelling and in people doing really grotesque things, and I'm definitely excited to get into the specifics of that because some of the specifics are slightly different. But yes, there are quite a bit of very nasty behavior that all of these characters dish out. It's very it almost feels angry and kind of self-loathing a little bit at the same time. And I'm excited to jump into that. So speaking of which, I think we are going to jump right in here. We are going to start off with Seeds.
Much a part of their twisted lives sends their world into a frenzy. Reaching, searching, pleading, denying no one until these primitive desires boil over into uncontrollable passion and violence. To learn the truth about the twisted lives of these people, you must see this motion picture. Seeds.
All right, we are talking Seeds. The this one. Normally, I kind of steal this part from the standard page for the film, but this one doesn't really have one because that's how small it is. So, in terms of genre, I guess I would call this kind of like a familial melodrama horror in a way.
Yeah.
That's definitely where the tone. Hot House, definitely a good descriptor of the feel of this film. This is obviously directed by Andy Milligan and stars a bunch of actors who, Kai, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong here, a lot of actors who were part of his theater troupe that he was a part of in the 60s, and he was a playwright before and after a filmmaker, correct?
Yeah, if you read the amazing biography of him, The Ghastly One by Jim McDonough, he was doing theater in the experimental scenes, really violent and similar theater to what he was doing in this movie. Like one of the famous stories is that he was getting an actress to be whipped on stage, and someone was like, shouldn't she be blocking it that she's not whipped? And he's like, no, it's her job to dodge the whip. And so that's the kind of space he was coming from, and that's where, he brought a bunch of these actors with him. And except the lead woman, Carol, is her name the daughter in the film, the main daughter?
Yeah, the main daughter's name is Carol, and she's played by Candy Hammond.
Yes, who was his wife at the time.
Oh, okay.
But
right, I read that they got married like on the set or something like that, like in the house, because the set was like his family house or something like that.
This movie created a love affair. Wow.
Well, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, I'm not going to try to repeat too much from Jim McDonough's book, but like, I think basically it was like they got married because he thought that it would like make him more palatable to the industry, even though everyone knew that he was gay. And then apparently the night of his wedding to her, like he went to a gay bar and they were like, what are you doing with the honeymoon? He goes, honeymoon, we got to make a movie. And so then they made the movie like very soon after this. But yeah, he was never, I don't think their marriage lasted very long. It was never like a real quote unquote marriage, you know?
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, so Andy Milligan was this, he was this queer filmmaker from Minnesota, and he, you might be able to fill us in on like, what part of the backstory is correct, because what I could kind of find loosely, because I haven't had a chance to read the book that you recommended to us yet, was that he kind of suffered a little bit from what was a physically and kind of mentally abusive mother, which is kind of how you get the tyrannical matriarch that you kind of see in this film here, and then
like
obviously
a bunch of other movies, yeah.
Yes, and that also a lot of people kind of accused him on sets of kind of being prone to kind of like these very angry, border on abusive outbursts, in both his acting troupe and then a little bit in his movies. And I read that he was like one of the dudes in his acting troupe eventually went to jail for plotting the bombing of an abortion clinic. Is that true?
Oh, I think he got arrested for bombing like 3 or 4 of them. Yeah, actually, I may have written a note about this, actually. Let me see. It was Dennis Malvasi, who he started in Milligan's Theater Company. He was in one of his last movies, Carnage. But yeah, he got into like a Catholic cult. And yeah, I think they arrested him on 3 or 4 of them. There was also a guy like... the note above Dennis Malvasi wrote down is Gary Stone famously got fucked by a dog at a cocktail party, which is, and like apparently the way that happened was just like he took off his shirt on set and they're like, why do you have claw marks on your back? Like these were the people, that were hanging around Milligan.
Jeez.
Yeah, so this is who he was making art with and who he was coming up with ideas with, and he got started in kind of like this experimental off-Broadway, kind of theater shows where apparently, he did a lot of the, a lot of the set design and costuming and everything like that. And obviously in a lot of his work, as, Kai has mentioned, he seemed like a pretty angry guy. A lot of his films, from what I've read, seem to focus on kind of like, this kind of transgressive form of, cruelty and punishment and these very dysfunctional, family units that eventually, kind of attribute this psychic and physical breakdown, much as we see in this film, which, has, some of the like ugliest, most sadistic, imagery and content, because it kind of starts off as like, it reminded me a little bit, I'll say honestly, of something like Spider Baby, where you kind of have a little bit of that black and white dysfunctional family, but this at a certain point it just becomes a series of shock reveals on the background of what this family has done to one another, and eventually it just becomes like that slow breakdown after the reveal every single time. And it just becomes a series of shots of people's wounds and then people screaming and crying and abusing each other, drowning each other, throwing acid in each other's face. There's, like suicide and incest and, sort
way
of
too
back
much
alley
incest.
abortions.
Yeah, a lot of incest.
Well, we'll talk about that more later, yeah.
And Andy shoots it like it's just, it's so like sporadic a lot of the time. He does a lot of camera shaking and a lot of very strange Dutch angles. Sometimes where it seems like the camera's almost completely on its side. It's very disorienting at times when you're watching all this chaos on screen.
Yeah, I read that he shot it on a single handheld 16 millimeter Oricon camera, which is one of those like really old school like news cameras where you kind of shot, you know, your video and sound on the scene. It was kind of meant for, you know, if you're out on an, you're one of the people sort of out and about actually like at the scene of an accident or something like that. This is the kind of camera you would carry around with you.
And going.
Yeah, and that's also why the sound sounds so blown out.
I was going to say, everything, especially when they start just screaming at each other, everything sounds like it's clipping, and it has like a natural distortion to a lot of the fighting, which is definitely effective. I mean, obviously, as an audio person, you don't normally go for that, but it really works for this setting.
I mean, JB, you mentioned earlier that the camera's going crazy too. I mean, he wants everything to be as much as possible to like compensate a bit. Apparently, his scripts used to write stuff like "do the business" or like "swirl camera." Like, he just and which would, you know, and you see that throughout this movie, and you hear as you guys just said as well. It is. I find this movie to like be really fucking exhausting, honestly, to watch.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, like there's parts that I was actually curious if it was just kind of the old film reel, or if it was actually him doing a stationary camera setting, but then he would shake it. Like there's this part in the church, which we'll get into more detail, of course, but he's just filming the priest, and at one point it seems like the camera just does like a violent shake, but then goes back to being kind of stationary on the priest, and I couldn't tell if it was him shaking it or if it was just the old film kind of, you know, doing it based on its wear and tear.
I mean, he definitely was using cheap equipment, so it is kind of hard to say. But I will say that, regardless, it like that does give it this like very, strange energy that it has, where the camera, I did read too, as Kai mentioned, that, you know, he talked about that he wanted this swirl effect a lot. That, you know, he wanted to be able to follow anything at any moment based on the action or the feeling of the particular scene. And so when two characters are screaming at each other, sometimes he'll just start, you know, moving around them, or he'll, you know, all of a sudden, you know, Terrence Malick style, he'll just like go focus on something else for a second. He'll focus on like a body part or something. And he definitely wanted that kind of freedom of movement, but it's also so erratically done that it just kind of it mirrors the energy of what you're feeling, of just kind of like this raw expression, and kind of how ugly what these people are saying to each other is, and what they're doing to each other is, and then how you're also experiencing it in these like unbearable close-ups that feel like they just keep moving closer and closer as, you know, the wounds start to open up kind of on screen. Which, speaking of which, for anyone who hasn't seen the film, I kind of laid it out, like a little broadly, that this is like a family melodrama. But we should mention that like the main sort of figures of it, and as it kind of opens up, is there's this sort of like abusive mother figure who lives in this house, and she lives in it with, you know, the one daughter, Carol, who's the main daughter, and then she also lives in it with, I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be one of the sons or if it's just a caretaker. Who's the eye patch guy? This is the guy with the eye patch.
Yeah. I thought he was her. I've seen this movie like twice. I think it's her new husband or new boyfriend. It's not clear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I found it a little bit confusing as well. But I do think she mentions something like she says something to one of her daughters, I think, where she says like, "This is your new daddy" or something like that.
Yes.
And I think that's the eye patch guy. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, that would make sense, but also they all sleep with the entire family, so you don't know if that even makes a difference or not, right? Like whether it's not family, like you can't use that as a
the most like against that. Unflattering sex scenes that I've ever seen in a film, half the time, I would say. So.
So that's one thing we should mention, is that obviously the film is called Seeds, and it has one of the greatest poster taglines of all time, in my opinion.
Great.
Where the seeds are sowed in incest and harvested in hate, and it's obviously referring to this idea of sort of like a bad seed, a foundational, sort of transgressive quality to this family that has spread and infected the entire family. But it was also retitled The Seeds of Sin context for this film was a kind of like soft core version where they actually threw in like full, generic soft core sex scenes with like jazzy score and everything like that. And you can watch both versions of the film on the Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray. And I did kind of tune into the softcore version because I remember I remember finding out that it existed. And I was like, is that the one that I watched when I previously watched this film? I don't remember that being a thing. And no, so it turns out when Vinegar Syndrome put the film out, they put out the reconstructed version of the film that he originally intended to release, which is the one that I believe that we all watched. If you didn't watch a version that has, when the incest starts, it just turns into like a Baum Chicka Wow Wow style film for like literally 5 minutes, then you watch the right version of the film.
Gotcha.
And yeah, really, really bizarre experience, tuning in to see a couple of the differences that they did there. And also it took out, some of the more, insane conversations that take place in the film, like the one that the mother has with the youngest son.
When she finds out he's like a Nazi, or when she just tells him reminds him of why he's been kicked out of school so many times.
Why he's been kicked out of school so many times, because he keeps having relationships with some of the other boys at the school, and they keep telling him that that's not something that he's supposed to be doing. But then it turns out that it was possible that he was also assaulted by the priest,
and himself may have done some assaulting.
Yes. We'll get into the specific reveals.
Yeah.
As we go through it, but like there's some really, really fucked up shit in this movie.
And it's all, I feel like we keep going forward because it's all just like a big fucking mess of soup, It's hard to get a handle on what happens moment to moment and the causation of it.
Yeah, definitely.
But the early scenes are honestly just kind of like this really, kind of like shitty Christmas dinner. And right. Carol wants to invite the entire family over, who is kind of estranged from the mother because, the mother is, based on the early scenes where we see her. She's kind of prickly, and the way that Milligan shoots her, she's very kind of like sickly and being carried around by this husband / caretaker with an eye patch who, is kind of like basically like, like the Frankenstein monster, just carrying her around the house and everything like that. And she invites everyone over, and they basically tell Carol right at the beginning of the movie, by inviting them here, you have destroyed this house. And then what we watch is the destruction of this family unit as people, start to meet up for the first time in many years. They all have incestuous relationships with each other, not just brother and sister, but like they also like swap husbands and wives at various points through the film.
All the caretakers too, like there's two nurses that are talking about, taking the money and leaving. And then I think there's one scene where a doctor comes in and he's telling the mother not to drink as much and all that, but he's doing it in a very aggressive and inhumane way. And then I think he pours out the liquor in front of her, and he does that not because he really cares, but he mentions that it's his income, so he just has to keep her alive.
For 7 years, you've been part of my income. I'm not going to let you drink yourself to death because I need to keep upping the rate on you so that I don't lose money.
So even all the things that should be like, good things to do for people are all wrapped in reasons that are quite horrible. Which is also something that this movie just keeps up.
Yeah, the housekeepers are like plotting their escape from the house, and their escape from the house is essentially killing the mother, but also robbing her of all of her things by having her to get to write them in the will, because they know that she hates her children and everything like that.
Right.
So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff like that in between all of these characters. So all of these characters are greedy and like plotting murder, and also indulging in whatever kind of sexual impulse they have from like moment to moment. And I was really fascinated by the way that Milligan actually shoots the sex scenes, like that first sex scene between the two housekeepers who are, plotting a murder kind of like on the side of all the gross things that we're seeing. And just the way that Milligan will, again, he'll just like, it's this weird thing where in another context, you could see how it could be romantic, but because you know all of the details of why these people are together and what it is that they're doing, you know, the fact that he moves in on their hands and skin touching each other, which would be a romantic gesture to do in, you know, any other movie. It's just, in Milligan's version, it just feels like this weird, like, contorting shape that their bodies just take. And it's just like this, you know, and again, because in the version that's not a sexploitation film, there's none of that, like, jazzy score either. So it's like the actual sex scenes are kind of quiet and just weird.
Yeah, there's also this the one part where I think it's the two nurses where they're making out and gonna have sex, and the one girl wants to go to somewhere more private, and the guy just kind of insists that they do it right there, and it just feels very very dirty and gross, and you know, it's just something that it feels Andy has to constantly throw in. It's like even the two nurses that have this plan to inherit the money and then leave and all that are even have this kind of disgusting relationship that's between them that we don't really get to dive into, but the implications are all there.
Well, it's, if you look at Andy Milligan's movies in a general sense, his relationship to, like, sex and intimacy is really interesting as it goes along. I mean, you both mentioned there is this kind of weird push and pull between, like, how these people are, like, what they're ostensibly doing and why they're doing it out of, like, these emotions like love and even, like, you know, just finding each other attractive and lust, and then the violence of how they often enact it and receive it. I mean, there's a part in one of his lesser known movies that I really love. The movie's called Blood, which I don't remember much about, but there's a scene where, like, a woman's in bed with her, I think, vampire husband, and she's like, "Tell me you love me," just, like, begs him to tell her that he loves her, and he won't, and it's, like, it's as violent as some of the sex scenes in this movie. And I think that, I mean, not to pop psych too much, but I mean, you know, we mentioned earlier that Milligan was, you know, abused by his mother, and by the end of McDonough's book on him, there is a suggestion as well that he may have in turn abused his younger sister. And I think that, you know, not getting too deep into it, but this push and pull of, like, intimacy and how it can be like a force of, like, good and redemption, some like hints of it here, and then how it is just this violent thing that you can inflict upon each other. I think that's really interesting in this film.
Yeah. No, definitely. You definitely get that feeling that there's kind of, like, you know, especially in the character of Carol, who it kind of turns out, you know, by the end of the film is kind of like the prevailing destructive force that maybe even committed the, you know, sort of inciting incident that, you know, caused the mother to, you know, even be sort of frail and in the wheelchair and everything like that. But that it was, you know, that, you know, it's obviously implied, obviously, in the title and through the film, that it was passed down to her sort of generationally. But you kind of get this idea through her that she is yearning for, you know, what is, you know, sort of like these gestures of, you know, what a family unit should be doing. Like, having a relationship with her brothers is something that interests her, inviting them over for Christmas dinner. Like, it's a, you know, it's the kind of gesture that she's like, this is what a family is supposed to do. This is something that I want. Right. But because of you know, these sort of darker things that have, you know, gotten inside her and are now being expressed through her, you know, there's something, you know, that's spoiled that for her. I think that at one point the mother literally says that I spoiled all of you and you ruined my life, so now I've ruined your dinner. That's the kind of things that these people are saying to each other. And Carol is, at a certain point, you know, because she's kind of like our entry point. She's the one who, you know, wanted to have the entire family over. She's the one who, you know, talks with a lot of the different family members. And she seems actively, for a large part of the movie, the only person who's not really plotting anything. Right. But then it turns out that she is actively kind of interjecting the chaos that allows, you know, all of these things to bubble to the surface, that we see all of these different various plots that are taking place both between the housekeepers and then, you know, her brother, who she's excited to see. And it turns out that her brother has had a relationship, a sexual relationship with Carol since, I believe he says he was like 18 and she was 13. Or something like that, and that monologue moment where he reveals that to his own wife is so crazy.
Yeah.
Where he's just like, you want to know what's going on in this house? Yeah, I've been having sex with my sister since she was 13.
He's like throwing in her face, like ah ha ha ha, like he's like spitting blood in her, like Tyler Durden in Fight Club.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this also when she's like runs frantically away and then puts the knife to her chest and all of that?
Yes.
Is that same?
Stabs herself in the chest, which is obviously, a really, really crazy way to commit suicide. And even when the people...
She tries to do it. Yeah, she starts to do it, then changes her mind, and then the killer opens the door and makes her smash her knife into herself, ultimately.
Right, because all of these things make it look like they could have committed suicide as well. Like they have the guy that is going to hang himself, but then doesn't, but then the chair gets pulled out from him. We have the girl the one that's completely accidental. She puts a radio next to the bathtub, which probably just wasn't the smartest move to begin with, but hey. And then
wait, actually, I was a bit confused by that scene, and this is the second time I've seen it. Does someone... Okay, who is the girl who gets killed in the bathtub? I thought it was like this.
At first, I thought it was Carol because
that's
she
what
had
I
short hair, but I think it's actually one of their
Carol,
wives. That's what it is.
Yeah, Carol takes the bath first in the tub, so it's the same tub that Carol is in, like very early on, where we just get a scene of watching her kind of like. Just basically like clean herself, and like that's it. And then
that's that loving wife gaze. Like Paul, it's like Paul W.S. Anderson and Mila Jovovich.
Exactly. But yes, it ends up being the wife that is trying to cheat with the one brother with the other brother who's a priest. So the woman who is trying to have an affair with the priest. And is the wife of the brother that Carol's actually sleeping with. That is the woman who is in the tub and who ends up getting the radio thrown into her, because it is, in my opinion, the filmmaking did imply that it didn't just fall in, that there was like kind of like this shadow and this strange thing that takes place, and then she screams.
I actually I thought that's the person used like a long device to pull in the radio. That's what I wrote down.
Do you know what? That might have been it too. It might have been like that little hook thing.
It's like stage cane thing.
That's what it reminded me of, because it reminded me of like, because it just comes out from the side.
When you yank the dude by the neck.
Yeah, and this giant cane comes out of nowhere and grabs the radio and kills the girl. I honestly got a little bit of a chuckle out of the image at first until all the death occurs. But
yeah. So it's implied by the end that Carol is the one who is actually doing all of this murdering. But it's so interesting watching Carol just move room to room and just basically like seducing each character into revealing the ugliest parts of themselves until they basically do almost self-destruct, or she almost doesn't have to kill half of them. They're already like freaking out, and obviously the one wife is the one who's like, I'm gonna kill myself, and the other husband is shouting at her that she doesn't have the nerve. And everything like that, and the shot of the when the knife goes into her chest and it just starts leaking blood everywhere, and then it match cuts to the water leaking out through the bottom of the bathroom door of the girl who drowned and everything like that. And then when you go in and you just get to see this still shot of her like screaming, stunned face, just like naked in the water there and everything like that.
That is a great
really
shot.
Yeah, just really like grotesque imagery that very much suits the actual tone of the conversations that are taking place. And I think that was the thing that struck me the most about this the first time I watched it, was that just what these characters are doing and saying to each other is so awful. And it feels like Andy Milligan is trying really, really hard to make the imagery match that tone. And it gets very severe at a certain point, like especially like
there's no like redeeming characters in this at all.
No, it's really brutal. Everyone is just acting, everyone is telling each other stories about their terrible childhoods where in some way they were, physically and sexually abused, and then how they have manifested that into some, the way that they treat other people. And like they're all also so greedy and sex starved and
right. Like we have the older blonde sister who's with, I can't remember his name, but even their relationship, who it seems has like at least the most loving in the sense that they both are on the same page with each other.
The most consensual relationship.
Yeah. Even that is like has all these undertones of like domination and abuse and probably.
Yeah, she literally calls him an animal.
Right.
And says that when I met you, I knew you had sadistic impulses, and it's implied, obviously, that is part of the attraction.
Right.
That the sadism of her own family attracted her to this man who just treats her very brutally.
And doesn't he say something? It's a great line. It's like, "I love you so much, I could kill you," or something like
yes.
that. Yeah, which is just a perfect piece of dialogue that fits very well in this entire film.
Yeah, it feels like if there is any line that's going to sum up the feeling of this movie, it's "I love you so much I could kill you."
Yeah, definitely.
Because this is just the most toxic, ugly relationships I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, most
in a
dysfunctional
movie.
family on film, I think.
But it's weird. It feels like genuine, expression and feelings of these characters. So it's a weird kind of contradiction.
I will say I never felt like I was just gonna say I never felt like this was like I never eye rolled or anything with how exaggerated and crazy bad this family really was. It did feel like Andy was channeling something really authentic inside himself, which say what you will about it, but it does. I don't know. I maybe I was just sometimes with these shock movies, I think sometimes they're just doing it for the sake of it. But this all felt like it came from a genuine place, which upset me probably even more. But it works. It works really well.
I'm totally with you on there. I think you said that phrase like inside himself, like Andy's inside himself. To me, I mean, what I kind of think about when I saw this movie last week was that. That really shitty James Mangold, I think it's John Cusack, Identity, that movie with the split personalities, because which is maybe a very lame reference point, but just the idea of in that movie, these are all metaphors of different aspects of someone's personality fighting out to like deal with their most violent impulses. But in Seeds, I feel like this horrible, huge but claustrophobic house is, some form of Andy Milligan, and all of these people are variations on different ideas he has about himself and his sexuality and his religion, and they're all just, I mean, I feel like, Josh, you mentioned earlier, it's like a bunch of scenes where Carol like seduces someone and destroys them, and to me it feels like a bunch of these therapy sessions, just one after another. But the purpose of the therapy is not to like help them, it's to like make them kill themselves, basically.
Yeah, the opposite, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, and it feels like a reckoning with like, both, sort of like this uncontrollable aspect of it, which is again this basic idea of the bad seed, which is something that I think the mother does eventually say to the youngest son, the one who is sent to military school. And then I think at one point someone says, well, what does that say about her womb or something like that? And all the kids are obviously all screaming about, while they're doing all these, violent sexual acts, they're also, screaming about their inheritance. And I couldn't get over the scene with the youngest son, because it starts out as the scene with the priest who is, not being a very good priest in the first place because he's, having relationships with his brother's wife. But then also it's implied that, he ruined the youngest son by touching the youngest son. And later in the film, Carol eventually seduces him and is like, why did you go to a slut like that wife that I killed in the bathtub when you could have had me this whole time? And the priest and the Carol used to play, like a little game of the brother and sister playing doctor and patient, and he basically just starts openly weeping while feeling her breasts. And he's like, God forgive me, punish me.
That scene is just unbelievable. Yeah, it's so open. I feel uncomfortable watching that scene.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and again, like, this is the kind of conversation that these characters are having while also, talking to the son and being like, you're a sick little boy and the world is sick and full of hate. And he talks about how he tries to give them love and he tries to give them beauty, and he basically gets nothing in return. This is why I felt like this character was a very specific part of Andy, and it really felt like like this kid who just had all of these things happen to him, and he's trying to put, art out into the world, and it's coming out in a way that doesn't, that's infected by all of the stuff that's come from his family at the same time, because there's implication that he's also been abusive, and that he actually tried to like murder someone at school. I think that they mentioned too at a certain point, and that he has abnormal relationships and a repressed sexuality, and eventually I think they say that he did try to kill himself, and he slashed his wrists, and the mother just says, "Try harder next time." It's honestly the mother and son sequence that takes place there. It makes the relationship, the mother-son psycho relationship, look more functional and healthy.
Yeah, it does.
And then he's like running out to the yard in the house, where he's like, the trees are clawing at him, like when she's running in like Texas Chainsaw through the forest and everything like that. And there's a moment where like the tree, even like the natural world, is like cutting him and stuff like that. Really, really. Just like primal kind of stuff. The whole movie to me ended up reading as this really like primal howl of, like his own family experiences, and then how they have translated into, like the kind of, actions that he takes now, and kind of like some of the ideas that he has and everything like that. And really, really brutal stuff. And again, the style also makes it unbearable, because everything is just so close up and so kind of stark and cheap and kind of ugly looking, and all the audio is completely blown out. There's like a constant scratching and screaming sounds, almost.
And the thing is, it's like when they're speaking in just their normal dialogue, the audio isn't horrible, but a lot of the time they are just absolutely screaming at each other. So there's pretty much constant distortion. Once again, it really helps. I mean, it just creates another layer of kind of like grotesqueness that the movie has throughout. But
definitely, well, and just filthy detail too. Like I think about that monologue that one of the like caretakers gives about, they're still plotting the death of the mother and how they're going to get the money and everything. And the entire monologue about him trying to find out a way to kill the mother, he's just like biting these like filthy nails in close up. And that's like the choice of the shot during that. Yeah. And that feels like, the style choice that takes place throughout the entire film, even in the sex scenes that are supposed to be, slightly more intimate in a way. It just feels like this really grotesque rubbing of, nails on skin, and physical contortions and impulses all kind of like wrapped up into each other.
You can feel the splinters in all the walls and the railings in the house.
Yes.
Yeah. Definitely. And it ends up all coming to a fold with, obviously, it kind of being revealed that Carol is the one who is, sort of offing these people one by one. She's the one who stabbed one of the wives and killed the other one in the tub. She's also basically making her brothers want to kill themselves with guilt, like the priest who tries to hang himself.
And then I think when she makes the move on Michael near the end, they give in and do that. You were mentioning they play like that house kind of game, almost like the dialogue is very much like their children playing or something like that, which is very fucking creepy. And then and then he eventually resists, and I think that's what sets Carol off to kill the mother down the stairs, I believe, which then sets off like Michael trying to kill her and all of this. I mean, the finale is just nothing but death and the destruction of an already dysfunctional family.
Well, yeah, and she throws acid in her sister's face and melts it off.
Yeah, right. Almost forgot about that somehow.
Yeah, then the one boyfriend gets hit in the head and kind of like bleeds everywhere, and the climax is obviously the brother and the sister having sex, basically all around the corpses of the family and the loved ones that we know are in the next room while they're playing their they've reverted back to their childhood selves, playing, sort of like
house and whatever.
Yeah, playing house and dress up, and and he's just yelling no.
So many implications. My God.
He's literally yelling no as Carol is like trying to give him a blowjob.
Yeah. Oh my God. Jesus.
And yeah, eventually she ends up, because that sequence gets kind of like interrupted. Yeah, she ends up basically trying to kill the mother and pushing the mother down the stairs again, singing the "Step on a Crack, Break Your Mother's Back" song and laughing over and over again and stuff like that. Right. And then basically the brother who was just having sex with her like 2 seconds ago then has to strangle her to death as she laughs, and then he starts singing one of the childhood songs about like a bag of candy for mommy and daddy, and things like that.
And it's so strange too, because I think he like he hugs her and kind of is sobs about it too. So he goes from the strangling to like a hug of the dead body, and then reciting the family poem or whatever the hell he's reciting, and it's so just sad and gross and angry and hateful, and my God.
Yeah,
I like that the ending there is so moving, and it is just hitting you so hard that I feel like at a certain point my defenses at least start to fall away in terms of being emotionally moved by it. But I also like that it's pretty like irresolvable. Like, I mean, everyone's dead except for I guess the new husband character, but like he barely responds to it. We've known from the start that as the mom said, we're all going to die. We're all basically going to die, and I find that the ending to me, more than the tears and all and the scenes of the brother hugging Candy Hammond, it's just this sense of like this could happen again and this will keep happening, and maybe I'm projecting that because a lot of Andy Milligan movies are like this. Like even the Ghastly ones, which came out in the same year before this one, has like basically the same plot, but I just, that open-endedness at the end of it, that sense of nothing is resolved and this bad psychic energy is still in the air, that's what really haunts me from the end of this film.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Because all he does is he just walks over everybody, calls the cops, and then they just like freeze frame on him, right? Like there's nothing really.
Yeah, and the only person alive in the family, I think, is Michael, is the main brother who just strangled Carol for pushing their mother down the stairs.
Yeah, so even the guy that's left alive is not in the best mental space by the end.
Yeah, to put it lightly, yeah.
Yeah, and after obviously everything that he's seen and all of this sort of like, because for him, I think it's implied
he tried to
that,
live his most normal life kind of thing.
Yeah, well, he had like kind of like a normal wife, and he had like a middle class job, and he was just invited home for a family get together for the first time in like like it's implied like a decade or two or something like that. And yeah, everything that happened from his childhood just exploded into really really horrific. Violence. And pivoting I think towards reductive rating round on Seeds gets the high 4 from me. I think I need a little bit more time with this film. I find this film watching it twice now, I still find it very difficult to watch in a way that's definitely very intentional.
Right.
And it definitely has an impact on me. I think that it reminds me a little bit of stylistically of something like Spider Baby, or even has a little bit of Psycho in it as well, but done in, again, Milligan's just very very cheap close-up kind of style that just feels so sickening in its vision and style. The movie itself actually successfully feels icky before the family has even revealed their history of like sordid and despicable behavior, and each reveal of another incestuous relationship or another rape or some sort of violent abuse is just stacked
like, how deep can
an
this
overall like an overall just really grotesque portrait of screaming and crying, and you feel like you're just strapped in like another family member at dinner. So there's a really unbearable quality to this film. That's obviously, you know, something that Milligan is going for. It's part of the anger that he's feeling about, you know, this dysfunction and this sort of past history, and also trying to, you know, reckon with it in its own way. So this is my recommendation, that if you ever felt like you went to a family get together and you thought that your family was fucked up,
this will make you feel really good about your
This
family.
will make you feel really good. It's the same reason that I used to, my mom used to sometimes watch Jerry Springer, and I never really got into it. And she watched Jerry Springer because she said that it made her feel like her life was not falling apart. And that is, I feel like, the function of this film. That, you know, Andy Milligan is like, yeah, you think that, you know, you have a fucked up family and a fucked up past? Well, imagine it was more like this. And the way that he layers on that history in such a way that Jamie said that even though it's like heightened to the point of like absurd in terms of how grotesque it is, it never stops feeling like, you know, that it's not coming from a real place. And it is one of just genuinely the sickest and filthiest no budget films I've ever seen. And it's so ugly and sadistic and cruel and filled with so much hatefulness and depravity and punishment. I definitely leave this movie feeling like I need to rinse my eyeballs out, which you know is a good place to be when you host a show called Sleazoids.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would give this a 4 out of 5 as well. I did enjoy this. However you want to take that, but it's probably, I don't know if it's up there like top 3 filthiest things that we've watched on this show. I would say it's definitely on par with what was that one, the Blood Red Lake, or gosh,
Red Spirit Lake.
Red Spirit Lake.
One of the few other shot on videos that we've done. Speaking of the next film we're going to be talking about.
Yes, just gritty and I really enjoyed this. It felt like what I said previously. It feels like it comes from a genuine place. So all of the kind of shock value just doesn't feel like it's being forced. It really feels like he's expressing some inner anguish and hatred that,
which definitely is what makes it more sad when you think about it.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely does. And I think my second time, I feel like I'd be able to get into that sadness a little more, just because my first time I watched this, you know, I'm sitting down watching all this like incest and crazy murders and cheating and all this, and it was sometimes hard to get past just the shock value of it. But I find myself intrigued, and I think I'm gonna take another stab at it again. So I don't have much to add. I just think that this is really a honest film, one of the most authentic and honest films that we've covered. I feel like he holds nothing back, and I would highly recommend it if you think that you have the stomach for it.
For you, Kai.
Hell yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm honored that I brought something that really grossed you guys out. That is all I could wish for.
Absolutely.
And I totally agree with both of you. I mean, I think, Jane, what you were just saying about, like, it does feel very honest, and that's why it isn't just boring shock value. I mean, for me, to a certain extent, if you see something that is just intending to shock you, you can just get numb to after a while. But this always feels like there's some real pain there. But I also think this movie is, like, super funny. We didn't really get into this. I think, like, almost every line is really, really funny in a uncomfortable way. But I mean,
yes,
you know, we've quoted a few. I mean, the one that I like have just had in my head, I don't even really remember. I think it's in the conversation between the woman who gets acid thrown in her face and her husband, and she says, "Nothing can kill a bitch like mama," and which is so. I mean, that's like only the genius of somebody could write that. Yes,
just the energy. A little bit. It, like the energy of this movie is kind of like the whole runtime feels like just the dinner scene in Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes, 1,000%.
I wanted to add.
That's 1,000%. And like that dinner scene, I think that dinner scene is the part where you can kind of see where Hooper and co were trying to make Texas Chainsaw actually kind of funny. And I feel like it has that energy of Seeds the entire time of being really upsetting and just nonstop disgusting, and also like amusing and like really and like witty in its own kind of gutter way. And so I mean, those two kind of conflicting feelings, I really find this movie very cathartic to watch. Like, I mean, I'm not as self-loathing as Andy Milligan, but on bad days I can kind of feel something similar. And so just I don't know. I kind of let the images and the anger wash over me a bit this time, and I just found it not pleasant, but not exactly. It's I enjoyed it. And I want to do it again.
Yeah. Would you say that, like, how many times have you watched the Seeds now?
I've seen it. I think I've seen it 3 times now.
Okay. Have you found that you finding humor in it came from watching it the second or third time, or did you find that humor initially on the first run as well? Because I did. I mean, don't get me wrong. There were moments where I definitely think they're so over the top that you kind of have to have like a bit of a humor about it. But I just think that I might get into more of his like sadness and hatred the more I watch it, and maybe it won't be that. Maybe it'll be like I actually find it more funny. I see the dark side of the humor a little more.
It definitely, the humor came out to me on the second in this viewing.
Interesting,
but it's I think it's less even because of the times I've seen this movie. And by the time I rewatched it, I had seen a fair few Andy Milligan movies, and you read the book. I mean, I think that I was able to kind of get a sense of this constant tragic comic vibe to everything. Like, and when at a certain point, I start watching the Andy Milligan movies, and like when I think back to them, I don't really have clear memories of like individual films per se. Like I have moments, and they're all swirling around, and so in that mess is just a mixture of like these absolutely horrific things and these really ridiculous things. Sometimes at the same time, I mean, some of the cheapness comes to that. So I think that just as I've gotten a handle on Milligan as an author over time, that is what's kind of let me key into the humor it's there. Not that it's like,
gotcha.
It is also horrific. I think it's totally valid to not find it that funny. I think I just also, I also am like relatively desensitized to shock and exploitation. And so it's even just the fact that it is like witty at all is automatically letting me key into some of its humor over something like August Underground. Bad example, but that's the other thing I was thinking of.
Okay.
Are there any other what's like the next Andy Milligan? You think,
I was just gonna ask.
Haven't seen much Andy Milligan.
The next one I would say is probably you should watch be Fleshpot on 42nd Street, which is also Vinegar Syndrome. That one's actually kind of sweet for parts of it. That's about this a sex worker who is just having a really tough time and trying to like deal with her rent and just living situation on 42nd Street and et cetera. And she had a large cast of characters of characters presumably Milligan knew. And towards the end of the movie, she actually has a very brief and like really sweet romance with the guy played by Harry Reams from Deep Throat. Or like what it's so funny about that movie is that the movie he did just before that was something called Forced Entry, which I don't need to describe. You can get the gist of it. And he suddenly comes in and you get a real sweetness of Milligan through this character who spends like 5 minutes defending Staten Island to the main character. Like it has some sweetness in it. And then after that, I mean, honestly, like I think you could just like go wherever you want. They're all, I mean, I feel like Andy Milligan's kind of like Jess Franco. Like every movie is the same and different, and like getting on its vibes is kind of at a certain point you kind of got to buy into it. If you want something a little less rough, The Weirdo from '89 is equally as horrific and depressing, but like kind of slickly made, which is a bit disconcerting when you hear Andy Milligan's words come out of these people's mouths.
Would you say that this is one of his more accessible films?
No, I wouldn't. I probably, yeah. I probably.
So this is the like, dirty, gritty stuff.
Yeah, this is like peak Milligan.
I can't imagine how he could go any darker. But
if you want like the least dark version of Milligan possible, he made this shit sitcom. Sorry, I said shitcom for a reason, because he made this sitcom called The Adventures of Red Rooster that he filmed with like Hal Borsky, who brother wrote Seeds, and they filmed like 6 episodes of it to sell to a TV station, and it didn't work because it's awful in many ways. But it's on YouTube. It's uploaded by one of the actors, and I kept saying it's awful, but I actually think it's great. I think it's a delight. It's just like a bad sitcom, and it's a weird mix of like really aw shucks like Big Bang's Theory style like humor, and then like a little bit of like uncomfortable rage and psychosexual shit just under the surface.
Oh, wow. That sounds interesting. Milligan doing a sitcom. That sounds really fascinating. I might look that up.
No one talks about it. In Jim McDonough's book, he has like 1 paragraph on it, but I think it's fun.
Yeah, it sounds wild.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that will wrap it up for Seeds 1968. We are going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Blonde Death.
she's a real, genuine, three-dimensional human being.
Elbow room, I need spaceman, that ain't all. Yeah, first thing you know, the folks jump on my case.
Sure is hot tonight.
Trash that in its place. My old man's a fatso. He's got a pot belly for a mouth. Maybe my old man's a fatso, but you know he owns this.
I think we made it.
I think we made it! N-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Blonde Death, the 1984 sort of black comedy horror, kind of like Teen Lovers on the Run film, directed by a filmmaker named, from what I could tell, everywhere else online other than on, like IMDb and Letterboxd, he seems to go by the name James Dillinger, but his name everywhere else is James Robert Baker. What's going on there, Kai?
Yeah, I think he just. I think James Dillinger was just the pseudonym he used for filmmaking. Yeah, James Robert Baker is what he's credited on his books, at least.
Okay, so James Robert Baker is his actual name, but he wanted the name James Dillinger as like his
tape by James Dillinger.
And he's usually an author, correct?
Yeah, he had this movie actually came out before his first book was published, but he's primarily known as an author. Yeah, I could talk a bit more about some of his books later. There's an unfortunate rhyme in something that happens in Blonde Death and his later life and his career.
I ended up reading about that early, which I actually felt bad watching both of these because we didn't mention it on Seeds, but Andy Milligan ended up basically dying like in poverty alone in an unmarked grave from AIDS.
One of the last things he did, I believe, before he died was like take one of his friends out of his will for like no reason.
Damn.
Yeah.
Jesus. That's such a really, really shitty way to go. Like, despite the fact that he made as many films that he did, like he just died in complete poverty, and because of that couldn't afford a burial, so he's just in an unmarked grave somewhere.
But actually, did you see the other day someone 2 weeks ago or something, someone bought a gravestone for him?
That's nice. Yeah, that's nice. That's good to hear.
Well, I was very excited going into this because we obviously I figured out the connection as soon as I saw this, that James Dillinger also did he describe himself or did someone else describe him? But he seemed to have be known as, quote unquote, the world's angriest gay man.
Yeah, I think that was something ascribed to him. Yeah.
That was ascribed to him. Okay, because that definitely, when I read that, I was like, okay, so that's the connection between these films. Very angry queer artists, letting their ideas a little bit about, the sort of like family unit and suburban America more in Blonde Death, and doing that in this very sort of cheap style that allows them to be as ugly and transgressive as they want to be, but also as creative as they want to be, which is something we always talk about on the show, is that obviously Blonde Death, it's reported, was shot on $2,000. So when you're shooting movies on that amount of money, there's no person with money telling you, no, you can't have the dad spank the daughter and talk about how they used to play games together and imply all this incest. There's no one telling him he can't do that. So he's just like, yeah, I'm just going to throw it in. And I will say, Blonde Death, I picked up on the really grotesque and absurd sense of humor a lot faster.
He's so funny. Some of the lines in this movie are absolutely hilarious, and honestly, the readings of them too. So the actors are pretty good given the circumstances.
They're in on it.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, Josh. You mentioned that there's no one telling him no, basically. But I mean, it's interesting because not just before 10 years ish before this, in 1976, he made a short film called Mouse Club Confidential, with K's for Club and Confidential, which was about a Disney star who gets into gay bondage porn. Apparently, I cannot find it, nor can I find much information about it. But apparently, it really pissed off a lot of people. That the film festival got really mad at him, and I'm going to say this, even though I could not find a source for it because I think it's funny if it's true, which is that Michael Medved, who invented the Golden Turkey Awards and got Ed Wood famous by saying Play 9 for Outer Space is one of the worst films of all time, he apparently, after seeing Mouse Club Confidential, decide to like stop being a journalist and become a film critic. Don't know if that's true, but it sounds like a legend, you know.
Doesn't he also have a mention of Disney World or an implication of it later on with like a mass suicide or something like that?
Yeah, well, they go to Donkeyland, I think it's what it's called, which is actually before Escape from Tomorrow took all the glory. This movie actually did also shoot unauthorized in Disneyland,
guerrilla style in Disney.
So awesome.
Yeah. That he you can tell that definitely, you know, he looked at, you know, sort of, you know, things like, you know, moving to Orange County and trying to live like this normal sort of like suburban life and going to places like Disneyland and going to the beaches and things like that. You can tell that he tried to capture that kind of setting in basically as poisonous a way as he possibly could when making this film. And the film is so, in terms of its tone, it's just so strange and, you know, strangely also kind of like, you know, lyrical at times too. Like it's kind of pretty sometimes, despite the fact that, again, this is a shot on video film on analog video, obviously, which we've only talked about once before. Steve Carlson brought with him. We did Boarding House and Red Spirit Lake, where we talked about Charles Pinion, obviously, which was an incredible film and obviously really grotesque and surreal. And this film, you know, uses a couple similar qualities, but I would say that it almost doesn't need to go as, I guess, surreal with it. It's almost like it's trying to depict the suburbs as, you know, just sort of like this hot house of grotesquerie as is, that you don't even need to throw in, you know, ancient spirits, anal raping gangsters to, you know, get his point across. Like,
I mean, it's almost
in Red Spirit Lake.
It's so dense in its dialogue. Like, I feel like if it had more style, it would just be unwatchable to a certain extent. There's that Paul Schrader had, I don't remember where he said it, but like, you know, a movie should only have 3 or 4 good lines because every line is clever, then nothing sticks out. But then this movie, I feel like every single line is written to just like hit you in the gut. And so I feel like just having it be so plain with that video really does help it breathe. Definitely. And very loosely, the film follows a teenage girl named Tammy, played by Sarah Lee Wade, and it has, again, like Seeds, one of the all-timer poster taglines, "Meet Tammy, the teenage time bomb. 18 years of bottled-up frustration are about to explode." And obviously, she's a little blonde girl, and so yeah, she's gonna end up on a little bit of a killing spree, and it kind of mirrors, you know, like obviously it takes this very loose Bonnie and Clyde kind of framework of like romantic teen rebels kind of like on the run, and I definitely did think a little bit about Badlands watching this film, which obviously Terrence Malick, you know, took on, you know, this idea of, you know, having this very sort of like lyrical, childish, kind of romantic runaway experience that these kids have, and then kind of layers in some of the grosser things that they end up doing into the film and how they get taken down. And this definitely has a similar idea, only it's able to get grosser, which is kind of, you know, both, you know, it ends up in a very misanthropic place and a grotesque place, but it also, because of the fact that, you know, in the writing and in the performances, there is, you know, a little bit of a sense of these kids are yearning for a kind of, you know, sort of escape romance. Yeah. You know, there does end up being something kind of tragic about it, even though, you know, there is, you know, very much, you can tell that James Robert Baker is approaching this with a very, you know, satirical point of view as he tackles these things, because the movie is just incredibly funny and incredibly witty in terms of its writing at times. There's a lot of, as we go through it, there's going to be a lot of like actual just line reads that we're going to read out at a certain point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one, just to start off, like the whole relationship with Tammy and her mother. Her mother is like this very Christian woman who watches like this Christian rock performer on the television. At one point, she sees Tammy's, I think, diary or something like that, and in it says like "nice girls fuck," and things and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And so they definitely have friction between each other, and the mother isn't doing anything that seems like it's really for her child. They even have a line where she says something like she wants to put her college tuition towards the house because she doesn't really believe in Tammy doing anything or accomplishing anything. So, Tammy definitely has lived in a very repressed life so far from what we've seen her. And this is kind of her like opening up a little bit and expressing herself in anger as the movie goes on.
Yeah, because the family moves from, I believe it's Mississippi. They move from Mississippi to Orange County.
Somewhere along
and,
there.
and,
Okay.
and she and she sees it as an opportunity for like kind of like this new life where she's going to go to beach parties and there's going to be some domesticity to it. And if I'm correct too, the mother she's a stepmother, correct?
Yes, I think she's a stepmom because later in the movie we find out what happened to the original mom.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, we find out.
Right.
Yeah. We find out that the dad did something to the original
An
mom.
off-screen Fargo moment. Yeah.
Yes, and I love because like the stepmom plays it, very much like they just like the mother, the daughter, they don't really like each other, they don't really trust each other. But then it turns out obviously that the stepmom is obviously she's trying to send her instead of going to beach parties and working a part-time job for her summer, she's going to send her to sort of like this like Christian camp essentially where she's going to get it's a Bible study retreat or something like that. But I love the sequences where the stepmom will just like come home and she just sees, like Tammy like reading a book. And she's just like, you won't believe the hippie trash that your daughter has been reading. Proust.
Proust, yeah, that's so funny.
And then obviously then she ends up getting like spanked by the dad while she's like watching like a television performance taking place and everything like this.
And then
She just wants to dance in her underwear.
Yeah, she just wants to dance in her underwear. I'm just hanging out listening to, she's just like, what is this sick sexual filth that you're listening to? She's like, it's just contemporary rock music, mother. She's like, well, what are the secret messages between the lyrics? And I'm one of my favorite early lines is the dad in one of the creepiest but still funny lines when he's talking about how they used to get along better until he got this new wife that she doesn't approve of, and he says, remember when we used to like play together, we used to have a great time together, and then he follows it up with this very specific detail of like what's wrong with a dad who gets in a dress and plays with his little girl and lets his little girl put mama's heels on and let her walk on his face.
Put on stilettos. Oh my god, what a line. That's unbelievable. And also like when he's spanking her or whatever, she says something back to him like I can feel you smiling through your slacks. So there's just constant past implications of incest
filthy.
and just like it's so gross. But once again, it's like the tone that Dillinger finds is still humorous a lot of the time. I found like to make that stilettos line, it's obviously still equally gross, but I was shocked at how often I found the grossness really funny this time, especially compared to Seeds, which I was more so just shocked by a lot of the time. This one, I don't know, the humor really worked for me on this one. So
I think it helps.
Well, and just the,
go on, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it helps with some of the line readings that, like, compared to Seeds, like, a lot of what's happening in this movie, people are screaming at each other. There is a lot of just people being pathetic. Like, that's the line with the dad with the stilettos.
Sure.
He's, like, on the ground, if I remember correctly, and he's, like, almost crying. He's drunk. So, like, it's easier to take some of the, I think, more horrific things in this movie when they're delivered from people who were in usually some sort of underdog status, whether it be age or even just like state of mind. And I mean, of course, we get the class stuff later as well. And I think it helps,
right.
Without getting too much into it, like some of the violence that happens is a little more palatable coming from like someone who's been completely failed by the system rather than some people on equal footing in the Seeds house.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do just love some of the detail of stuff that's obviously in some of the dialogue, like the way that they speak to each other, like there's just so much specificity to the way that like the stepmom speaks to her and stuff, like when she calls her Little Miss Sex Machine Sniffing Surfer Crotch. That's just like poetry. it literally like it's grotesque, obviously, but that's it's very well written in that way. And then obviously the mother follows it up with, "You're spending the summer with Christ."
Yeah.
Yeah. And then wishing that her mutilated body gets found on the side of the freeway as she runs away from home and things like that. It's interesting because it's kind of it's the teen girl runaway from a repressed household. There is there's a little bit of a like you've seen it before, but there's so much just like weird specific detail in it that makes it very singular in the kind of way that he does it, and she ends up going on the run and finding a local lesbian woman who has
with an eye patch.
With an eye patch, also connecting the two films.
There's a connection.
With an eye patch, who is also involved in crime and like served in the military or something like that. She's just such a strange periphery character that is meant to represent kind of like this sort of like oddball sense of freedom that I think Dillinger is kind of going for. Like it's someone who exists completely outside the norms of suburbia, and that's why Tammy kind of picks up on her and finds her interesting in a kind of way.
Even though she too is like as miserable as everyone else in her own way.
Yeah. It's a lot of people seeking something else and not really finding it because there is nothing else out there. They just kind of find like an endless suburbia almost.
Yeah. What's the line? It's like vast swaths of Orange County, I believe is the line she uses.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting in that kind of way where it's like all of these characters are trying to transgress against something that is, obviously limiting and kind of, hurting their lives in a way, but they can't find a way to transgress against it that isn't also, kind of, harmful in its own way, that it is freer. I think they feel in a lot of times, in a lot of cases, they feel like they have more control and more power. But, there's also still this kind of, implicit ugliness to it. And I love, too, that a lot of this is kind of like voiced over by Tammy as well, where Tammy, like, I feel like that's literally ripped from Badlands a little bit. You can almost feel the kind of Malick poetry to the way that they kind of talk about things that are happening, except, again, hers are done in this very, where Baker has done it in his own unique way, where instead of, you have Sissy Spacek maybe talking about, sort of like the beauty of the sunset. You get Tammy here talking about like running nude through Kmart or sitting on Richard Gere's face.
I was just gonna say the Richard Gere line. Yeah, that made me laugh so fucking hard. I also love that happens the moment after she gets a note from her stepmother, and one of the first things the stepmother says in it is calls her like a repugnant sinner in the actual note she leaves for her. So that's just, it's constant. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, and eventually she ends up, very similar to the Bonnie and Clyde Badlands kind of, framework. She ends up running into, this guy who has recently escaped from prison and who takes, her hostage at her house, when she's there alone. And it's implied that he disemboweled the warden's wife to get away. I can't remember exactly what he says, but I love how specific he's like. It was pretty easy to escape. All I had to do was pretend to be a security guard and disembowel the warden's wife, and then just walk out. It was that was all it took. And
I guess she seems like a sense of freedom in this character.
Yeah, the same thing that she kind of. I mean, at first, obviously, she's distressed. She's being taken hostage, and this guy is, sort of, threatening violence against her, and he's also very, he's also in his own way trying to forcefully seduce her in a way. But she does eventually see that in his own way, you know, he doesn't have to live under the same conditions that she does because he's taking some sort of control. And he talks about, you know, the rich pukes and scumbags, and you know, he talks about all the people that he's killed as like a guy who sold weapons to Latin American dictators and like people who ran child porn dungeons and like really nasty stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it's interesting because you talk about how much of this is like a lot of these characters are aspirational, and I feel like she sees in him like he is against all the systems that she wants to be against, but hasn't been given the space to like express that rebellion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think that's spot on. Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. That I just nothing that led into this.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Perfect.
And then this is, I think, the first like initial real connection, I guess, that they kind of have is that he mentions that there was cyanide in the drink that the mother left for her. So I think, isn't that like the first kind of sign that it's like, oh, well, maybe even though he's tied me to a chair and has me at gunpoint, he hasn't tried to kill me like my stepmother has. So, you know,
yeah, like that's what's interesting is that you know, to her, like obviously this guy who is an escaped murderer, he has more moral high ground to her than her mom. When that happens, because he's just like she leaves a note where she tells them that there's Tang and Tylenol. And yeah, she put cyanide in the Tang.
What a combo!
And then combine it also with the Tylenol, which I guess was more considered more dangerous back in the day. I don't remember what it had in it, but I know that there's a reason that it was. So the mom was essentially the stepmom was trying to kill Tammy. And it was a plot between her and a pastor, which I think is also another connection, that there's a religious angle to this where a priest is involved. Yes, priest who fuck. That's right. And yeah, it ends up kind of, you know, starting this very interesting relationship between her and her captor that, you know, results in her asking him to take her own virginity while pointing a gun at him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So good.
And it's one of those things where like you know, obviously this is something that, you know, in another movie would be played as just, you know, very grotesque, and in the way that it's styled and textured, I think it still kind of is, but there's something so, I guess, you know, sort of juvenile about the character of Tammy and the way that she views all of this, that there, you know, she sees it as something genuinely romantic, or as she says multiple times throughout the film, it beats watching MTV.
Yeah, she's like surprisingly calm about all of this that's going on. I mean, you know, she has her like distressed moments, but a lot of the time she's like talking back to whoever is putting her through that, or she's just kind of calmly making jokes about the situation. I found her confidence to be endlessly funny throughout the film.
Yeah, well, and I think at a certain point too, she also doesn't care about, you know, she sees kind of like the doomed end point of the situation that she's in, and at one point she literally says, you know, we might die, but so long as you're inside me when it happens.
That's a beautiful line. That's so romantic, honestly.
I love that. It's also like another line that's I mean, not in the same vein exactly, but they're on the beach, and she asks him, like, we'll be together forever, right? And he replies with, in this world or the next. So they both have that kind of understanding that this is probably going to end in tragedy or death or violence or something in that realm.
100. I mean, even tied into that, like when she says she first loves him, right? Like before that scene on the beach, she's like, "Oh, I love you," and he says, and I'll get one last quote out of the way for now. But, "Oh, baby, you better be careful. Last girl who said it to me got decapitated when she stood up at the top of a roller coaster." Like for this guy, love and death had been there since the beginning, and for her, I guess she was in no love. And if death is the opposite of this imprisonment, sure enough,
right? Yeah. Yeah,
and what's more top of the world than standing up at the top of a roller coaster?
Exactly.
It's it's a very hilarious and metal way to go out.
Oh, it is.
And again, just so much specificity to it in that kind of way.
Yeah.
Like that's such a strange line to include, but and also though it kind of resembles, the path that they eventually go on. Like these characters do feel in a way like they're on a roller coaster and they're going somewhere. And, obviously the way that it, very absurdly and tragically, ends for these characters, for anyone obviously who is familiar with Bonnie and Clyde. We've talked about how it has the framework of that story, and they literally are watching Bonnie and Clyde at one point on TV in the house as well.
Yeah.
And specifically the part where you can see the bullet riddled bodies like sliding out of the car and stuff like that.
Right.
So, the movie sets up exactly where it's going super, super early on. So you basically know that these kids are going down. So all you get is kind of like these brief fleeting moments of, a kind of, a very, a freedom for a very specific type of person who's in a very specific type of class-based reality, right?
Yeah.
Like other people wouldn't assume that this is necessarily, it's not
Wouldn't
their
be their
version of where they
definition
would
of freedom.
hope to be.
Yeah.
That's what I find so.
But for these characters, it is, and that's what I think is so cool, is that it's a genuine expression of, yes, these things that they're doing are so kind of, sort of like simple and, at a certain point kind of, sort of grotesque and limiting still in a way, but to them it's not at all. They're like, oh my God, this is like the most power and control I've ever had or ever been able to express in my life, and they love it.
Yeah.
That's what I find so moving about the movie, is that, it's this sense that, yeah, exactly what you just said. For them it is so cathartic, but we can see the limits of their imagination. Like we can see where they can't bring them. And I think that, James R. Baker is like very aware of this idea of, I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and it's a place where you can't get anywhere if you don't have a car. It's all strip malls and just like car dealerships as far as the eye can see. And I find that sense of just like they are still trapped within like what ideas of fun and expression and living life they've been exposed to. And even these guys who've gone to jail, basically all they do in the movie, and sure, this is partially budget, I imagine, but like they just go to the beach and like fuck around and they go to Disneyland. The idea of like Mexico is such an abstract idea here. It's almost purely like a genre archetype more than anything that they keep mentioning, even though, as you just said, they've already seen the movies that tell them how they end. And I find that sense of almost going far enough, but not quite. I find that very moving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too. One thing that I thought about while watching this film that kind of reminded me, it captures a similar experience that I got kind of watching Harmony Korine's Spring Breakers, which is a similar thing of like these characters going on this kind of journey and letting loose, but not letting go of the kind of like sort of like the uglier realities that make that kind of freedom of expression and freedom of sort of inhibition in a way possible. They they get to go on kind of like this very slick party experience, but the way that the kind of grosser elements of the crime genre bleeds into that and then becomes one with the freedom aspect. They start to accept that aspect of it, and you get both until it's this weirdly grim and beautiful thing kind of at the same time. And that's something that I think that this film does that I haven't seen in another film, where you get obviously this tone is that Dillinger, I think, is taking the character of Tammy and her kind of fantasy experience that she's going on, this roller coaster that she sees herself going on, and he takes that absolutely seriously while not letting the uglier elements dissipate in any meaningful way. In fact, there's one of my favorite moments is a part that mixes them in perfect unison, which is crazy. It's one of the parts where they, it's right after they talk about, when they finally go kind of Badlands mode, and they are literally just like riding out together and going to the beaches together. I think that's part of the part where she talks about where they share intimate secrets, and they look over the vast mediocre expanses of Orange County, and they're like, there's a mutual throbbing that's too much for our bodies to contain, and everything like that. And they say something along the lines of, as they're tying the stepmom in the garage and like beating her, and they go, the world truly does belong to young lovers. And as it zooms in on the murderous, stepmom tied up, and then it's bam, cut to this like really, really classically romantic swirling beach kiss that they have. It's literally like that, that end of a Hollywood movie, kind of 360-degree camera spinning around as they make out on the beach. And the voiceover is her saying, while they're making out, while this romantic music is playing, while this like classically romantic form is over top of it, the voiceover is, I pictured Vern and the stepmom strung up like rancid sacks of beef, shoving clutches up their asses and yanking hard so that the guts come out like a piñata.
Holy shit.
Which is like she's literally saying this in the voiceover while the romantic aspects are playing, so you get them both completely interchangeably. And I thought that was just like a perfect moment of exactly what James Baker is doing here as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
But yeah, as they there's this kind of like this romantic aspect and this crime aspect, and they start to sort of build kind of interchangeably. They end up getting together with a third friend who breaks out of prison.
I believe he was.
And
his
I'm trying
cellmate?
to remember. Yeah, he was his cellmate, and it's implied that they had like a sexual relationship with one another, because that was just the way that it kind of worked.
Yeah.
And then they end up having like a love triangle between the three of these people who have all had sex with one another.
You get the classic line, the rules, loser gets it up the ass.
Yes.
So they have a great friendship.
Yeah, Tammy walks in on them wrestling in one half sexual, one half a little less sexual, I guess. And that really blows it all up. I love the line that the brunette guy says to the blonde guy when he's trying to like sell him on Tammy. He's like, Tammy isn't just some like pig I picked up at a hotel. She's a genuine 3-dimensional human being. Like, his bar is so low, and I love it.
Yeah, and I find it funny too that his friend basically home invades him the same way that he home invaded Tammy, and he doesn't realize it. Yeah. And then he turns around and he's like, "Hey, we know each other. What's up, dude?"
Oh, that seems so funny. Yeah.
Yeah, that and I think what does he say too? He said that the other dude who was in the cell with them didn't make it out because he tried to hotwire the Oscar Mayer weenie mobile and got shotgunned.
Yeah, that line is like, I hear that and I'm like, what is it? Like, I know what that means in like various pieces, but altogether is very confusing to me.
Yeah, just really, really, strange. Again, because this is at a certain point operating as like a bit of like a more horrifying crime movie in a kind of way, including some detail where like the lesbian friend who she makes and who has an attraction to her and gets very upset that she is seemingly starting like a relationship with two men. She's very upset about that, but then takes her on a journey where she's going to go and get revenge on a guy.
This seems crazy.
And she breaks into his into his apartment, scoops his eyeball out with like an ice cream scoop or something, and then runs his eyeball through the carburetor.
Oh.
Yeah, my favorite part though is when he just kind of accepts what happened and grabs a Budweiser and then just starts watching television again. That was like, I laughed watching so football. Fucking hard. I can't even believe it. It's like this dude, just the acceptance of it, and to grab like the American King beer. Incredible. Love it.
I think that scene's a really good example as well of, Josh, what you were saying earlier, like these mixture of these two, like the grimness and like the genuine emotion of it. Like, I think there is, as much as that like militant lesbian character is a caricature, like I think by the time we get to that scene, we have some empathy for her. Like, she is in her own way, scummy and very predatory, but she is, like, on the other hand, like, she, to a certain extent, lonely, and I think that she is a very angry person for understandable reasons. And so in this scene, like, it's horrible and ridiculous, and it's very funny, but I don't think that like Baker sees it entirely like that. I also think he genuinely like feels for her, and he has this genuine sense of like, yes, you go, girl, like you did it. You got this revenge, and you can't have sex with Tammy, but at least you can get revenge on your ex-boyfriend.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's supposed to be implied that he like took her eye out, right? Which is so it's literally eye for an eye is what's happening, which is another good joke.
Yeah.
And it's funny again. It's never expressed literally or in dialogue or anything. You're just watching a one-eyed woman scoop another man's eyeball out of his head.
Yeah, that scene really does feel like out of left field. And it's funny to say that given the movie that we're watching. But I mean, as soon as she enters in there, and then she starts scooping out that eye, and there's just those weird comedic beats. It does feel like a strange scene compared to everything else. Oddly enough,
they even like she ditches the two guys she's with, right? I remember correctly. It's literally just a detour in the movie. It does feel like very haphazardly put in. It's just like Baker was like, oh, I really want to have her like tear the guy's eye, but I can't figure it out to put it in. So let's just take a little drive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's when the two guys start like roughhousing with each other and looking like they're about to have sex, and that's when they come. That's when they come back to the house, and obviously Tammy is very upset seeing the two of them together and not with her, and the militant lesbian character is with her and sees this happening, and she goes, "Oh well, what's going on here? You trying to rape." You're trying to rape each other? You're trying to rape her or something like that? And she grabs out like a giant shear. Oh, yeah. And she literally just starts trying to cut their dicks off. And they're just screaming, that bitch trying to cut my dick off.
Oh, my God.
And yeah, just really just strange things happening. And then I think while she's trying to cut their dicks off, she's yelling rapists and homos at them while she's doing that. But then it ends up turning into a thing where the main guy who is actually romantically involved with Tammy ends up pitching that's just what things were kind of like in prison. The feelings that we were having are real, that despite what you saw, I'm not like cheating on you or anything. It's just, I have a past relationship that I'm kind of accountable to in a way. And his way of pitching, sort of like a love triangle where it's like maybe, my old friend and my new friend, and we could be all together. He describes it as a menage a trois.
Yeah, yes. Okay. It'll be a great menage a trois. Hey, if the French can do it, can we.
What a beautiful
yeah,
phrase.
That's what she says, right?
Yeah, that's how she responds.
That's exactly it.
It's like it feels like they're trying to channel this almost like classy romanticism, given everything else that's surrounding them. It's very funny.
Yeah, this is where they start entering the world of the more the European crime film Rebels. If it's good enough for the French. Yeah, and it's so interesting because, at this point, too, she's finding out, more of the sort of like toxic history of the family and everything. What is it that she finds out that the dad did to the mom?
I believe what it is that he drunkenly, accidentally pushed her into a wood chipper.
I hate when I do that.
And he has, and he
the best of us.
It's the best of us. Yeah, we all get drunk and accidentally push people into wood chippers. It's the way he says it as well. Like he calls her to confess. Like it's one of those great moments where he did not need to tell her that. Like telling her that is only causing her more pain. And I love how in that moment, he just by the end of the phone call, she's done with her dad. She's like, and she's done with everything. Honestly, I think that phone call is the moment she's dead. Like honestly.
Mm-hmm. Well, because she finds out that happens, and then also the eye patch woman ends up dying because she drinks the Tang, or is it the Tylenol? I can't remember which one she takes, but she ends up hanging out in their house and ends up drinking the actual cyanide poison or whatever, and ends up dying. And I love Tammy's little speech for her, because every experience she had with her was basically like the woman pursuing her sexually or joining her for like violent acts that she's going to commit around Orange County. Right. And that was her only experience with this woman. And she was, and I love the way that, because I mean, credit needs to go to the performances, I think, too, because the way that really Sarah Lee Wade delivers this line, I think, is so perfect. But she goes, I know she was pushy and that she turned out to be a psycho, but she seemed nice. She was good people.
She still sounds so homegrown, doesn't she? She maintains that like sense of Midwestern politeness even in the middle of all this crazy shit.
Time. Yeah.
And I really love that. Like, she sees this person who was doing bad things, but was not as evil as her own stepmom. So you know what? She's good people. She's a real person at the very least.
This is what leads into the accidental death of the parents in the garage as well, right?
where they park up against the garage and just leak carbon monoxide into it, which
I
eventually
think Vern
kills.
shows up too. Like, he doesn't even realize, but he's going into the garage trying to untie the mother, and that's when the parking happens and the exhaust and all that. It's just a classic misunderstanding.
This
of death by carbon monoxide.
This scene is also like not secretly. I just metatextually is very sad because this is basically how James Albert Baker killed himself eventually.
Really?
I
read that.
Yeah, I get some content warnings for previously, but whatever.
They all know on this show.
Yeah, they're fair enough. They all do know. we already talked about Seeds. Good point. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
But Robert Baker is fascinating. His books, I've only read 2 of his books, but they're both incredible. We were talking about how much this movie is influenced by Badlands and Bonnie and Clyde and how it's in the movie, and he's a huge movie buff. His book, Boy Wonder, is an oral history of like a fake new Hollywood producer, which I cannot recommend enough. It is an incredible book and so funny. But his last book that he released is called Tim and Pete, which is like, I guess considered in some circles like kind of a new queer classic. And that book is like kind of like before Sunrise, but like post or pre-peak AIDS crisis is a little bit of a cliche way to describe it. But that book ends with, without spoiling it, like the advocation of political assassination, like which got James R. Baker in trouble. Like he was basically like, yeah, if someone killed Ronald Reagan because of how he's dealt with AIDS, that'd be cool. And I kind of agree with him, but I guess I'm not a published author, so I'm not allowed to say that here. But like that led to him not getting published for a while. Like no one would touch him because he was so controversial, and he kind of had a following before that, as I understand it. But after this book, I think he self-published one thing online, and then he sadly took his own life. And so I think, like Annie Milligan, you can feel a lot of these, I guess, sublimating bits of self-loathing coming through the narrative. That obviously. He could not. I doubt he was thinking about blonde death in wherever his moments were. But I do think that death and those deaths in the film, like it is so absurd that I think it goes back to being tragic again. Like these characters are awful, but they get killed not even because it's not even like an expression of Tammy and company's like freedom.
They didn't even mean to do it.
Exactly. At least in Seeds, it's like there's like the hatred almost comes from that family love that's forced upon you when you're in that kind of unit, and
there's definitely a lot more intent going on.
So there's more
in Seeds.
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't looked at it that way.
Yeah, well, and I love too because her response to finding him was she's like, "Oh shit, he wasn't due back for another week."
Right. Yeah.
That's all she says. And I like too that you brought up his opinion on Ronald Reagan too, because Reagan gets cited in this as well. Where they mention that, how come no one ever kills the pukes? All the cool people, Jim Morrison, James Dean,
they all die
young, and all the tight asses get to go on living and stuff like that.
Like,
you can definitely feel a little bit of his own expression in there.
And I felt like it really expresses how they just feel about life. Like it does feel like they're on the track to the fast death this whole time.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So when you see that line, it's almost like it kind of relates to, I think, her like MTV watching that she says as well earlier on. It's just like she's viewed the pop culture, and she sees all these cool people dying of whatever it is, drugs, violence, all that. And so I think she almost sees that as like the way to go rather than be the old square. And that really does say something about their trajectory.
Well, they end up finding out that the guy that they're hanging out with, I think his name is Troy. They find out that also at a certain point, because the musician that they're watching on TV, I think they later get a report that he died as well. So he also died young. Okay. And then while they're watching that, Troy tells a story about how he killed his parents.
Oh,
and he laughs about it, and he gets one of the best lines in the movie, which is, "Yeah, I made it look like a psychopath done it."
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's good.
Yeah.
You know, he just killed his parents, but he was like, yeah, and, you know, I overdid it so that, you know, they, you know, because I'm a normal parent killer.
I wouldn't do that unless I was just trying to trick somebody.
That makes it so much sadder what happens to him later as well. How hard he really tried to kill, how hard he killed his parents really makes what his final fate is very sad in its own horrible way.
I also like there's one part where they imply that he goes and does something incredibly violent. I can't remember if they show it, but he shows up to the house with flowers, and Tammy's like, "Where'd you get those flowers?" And he just goes, "Don't worry about it," and that's it. And I just love I've said it a bunch of times, but just these constant implications of what the darkness surrounding them is, both humorous and worrying throughout the film.
Yeah, I love that stuff. Well, because there's a part too where I think she's sort of like reflecting on her previous life with her dad and some of the good times that she had with her dad, and the one dude brings up he says something along the lines of, you know, it's good to have memories, and then she brings up, you know, yeah, but he tricked my real mother into jumping into a tree shredder. So like, you know, like the memories are infected with that kind of knowledge of the things that they've, you know, like they've actually done. So once again, you're getting kind of like this sort of like this warmness, this sort of like fantasy aspect, and you're getting, you know, sort of like the grim reality of it as well, even though the grim reality in this film is still very absurd. And then while also doing that, you know, you get some sick jokes the whole time. One of my favorite jokes happens around this point in the movie where they say, the one guy goes up to Tammy and says, you know, we've been putting our heads together. We've got a plan. We're going to go rob a theme park. And she says, yeah, I noticed you've been putting your heads together. You probably thought I was sleeping.
That reminds me of another great line where I think it's her inner monologue, and she says something like, she's not too sure about the new guy, but he's great in the sack. Something like that.
And then you also get, you know, again, you get the sexual aspect to it, and, you know, it's meant to be this sort of like liberating thing in a kind of way, that these are the sexual relationships that they have. But then there's this dead serious moment where they say, you know, the reason, you know, so they end up going to Donkeyland or whatever. That's basically Disneyland. They literally go to Disneyland and shoot at Disneyland in the film, and they go there.
You can tell when they show it too.
Yeah, you can very obviously tell. And I think he tells Tammy, yeah, you know, the reason Troy is like acting weird here is because, you know, last time he was at Donkeyland, Pinocchio caught him jacking it in the mountain and told his dad, and his dad made him do it again, but with sandpaper.
No space that Baker's not like, gotta put some shock in here. Every joke.
Yeah, every single one.
Yeah, and I love this final sort of like reel of the film that ends in this kind of bit of pop gratuity, which again kind of circled me back a little bit to Spring Breakers, but it's like they literally plan on like robbing Disneyland in like these tracking shots, and they like break into the offices with the guns and everything while all the people are cheering on the rides outside and everything like that. And it's this actually really like thrillingly tense kind of moment. It made me wonder what, like, you know, if he ever got a shot at like more of like a thriller film, that he could have done something like that. Because the moment where they actually rob Disneyland is super cool. And also then they keep throwing in that absurdity to it when they're driving away. My favorite line probably in the entire movie, I know we've said a lot because this is just a very, you know, quotable, very well written film, you know, despite how cheap it is. And one of the line that he gets as they're driving away from Disneyland, like taking a dildo from a baby, which is just a set of words that literally no one has said before or after. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. But it's beautiful. It is. I love that. It feels like a perfect expression of that character. And then also it has the weirdest form of mass murder I've ever seen in a movie, because Troy disappears for a little while as they're doing the robbery, because he's pouring the cyanide tang into all basically the syrup and water. And they say on the news that, you know, like whoever did this was someone who previously worked here, and they mentioned that he did work there at one point. He knew all the, you know, he that was how they knew where to go to rob everything, was because he previously worked there at one point.
Right.
So they literally killed everyone at Disneyland.
What's that? It's so funny because it kind of doesn't, like, it happens off screen and they see the newscast and it has that amazing, an amazing line where the reporter says, like, I haven't cried since E.T., but this is too much. And, and I love that line for a few reasons. One of which is that it's just so fucking funny. But also, I mean, we were talking about earlier how a lot of the latter half of this movie is kind of these earlier moments and memories being kind of corrupted by the badness of the world. Her mom loses her dad. I mean, even the sense of like what her stepmother was, you know, and these characters just trying to like almost remove aspects of their past, even with Troy killing his family. And here we have like him going to this like place of his youth and a place for many people's youth where a lot of people have nostalgia for, and just like wiping it out. Like it's like the full self-annihilation, you know?
Yeah. I also love that line.
It's so good.
I haven't cried this much since E.T. I find it's also saying something like this guy hasn't really felt much of anything throughout his life. If like the only thing that made him cry last was E.T. and then this is the one moment that makes him like feel something again. I definitely felt like there was an implication that he just and you know, he's just some guy, so I guess it's just saying like your average person or whatever often feels more connected even maybe to like pop culture, regardless of its emptiness, than they may think.
Well, yeah, like his context for the emotional reality of feeling sad is E.T.
Exactly. And you just watched like a Jim Jones level mass suicide thing here. Or I guess it wasn't a suicide in this context.
Yeah, mass homicide.
Yeah, mass homicide. So yeah, that equivalence is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, well, and they end up hunting them down, like, and finding them at the property, and the cops end up trying to perform a raid, and they, you know, they're going, we know you're in there, we know your names and everything like that. And one of the perfect merging of comedy and tragedy in this is that, you know, they're trying to run out the back of the house, and they end up calling out for Troy's name and saying that they have his parents out there and stuff like that. But he killed his parents, or did he kill his mom? And they said they found his dad, or I think both.
I think they
dead. Don't know his.
Because I remember
but the guy what do they call out to him?
They say like it's one of your, like, they put supposedly one of his parents on the phone on like the loudspeaker, right? And then they're saying, you know, come out here, we still love you. And then the other guy is saying like, Troy, you killed your parents. Like, Troy, you did. They're not there.
Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, yeah, because they put his parents on and have him shouting at him, and it's literally convincing him. And I love too when he's walking out the back door and they call his name, and he's like, shit, they know my name too. He's like, fuck. And yeah, they were like, so they're literally, you know, pitching him with like, you know, we have your parents here, come on out, we're going to take you in, you know, cleanly, you're going to be reunited with your parents. And they're literally telling him, dude, you know, you told us you killed your parents. Those aren't your parents.
You killed them so hard.
He's so overwhelmed by, you know, obviously what he's just done, and as Kai pointed out, kind of annihilating his past by going back to Disneyland and performing a mass murder there. But also there's that sense that, you know, he on some level, he kind of wants to go back. And he gets this line where he says, like, you know, I want to be a little boy again with mommy and daddy. And he runs out to the front of the property being like, mommy and daddy. And they literally just brutally gun him down.
It's that mixture again of like the absurd hilarity of it. And then just that's so sad too. You know, just like I want to resort back to my childhood so I can just feel safe and comfortable again.
Yeah. And it's such a really, you know, like really, really brutal moment that's followed up by, you know, Tammy and the other guy, you know, still going, you know, on the run for a little bit. And they eventually see, you know, two guys in suits walking up to their house, and thinking that it's the FBI, they basically take suicide pills and start having sex, like exactly how they said they wanted to go out, where they're going to die in each other's arms. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, it turns out that they aren't FBI agents, but they're like door-to-door salesmen.
They're like, I think they're Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists. Yeah.
So they literally end up killing themselves for like no reason. They weren't actually being caught. But they get this last moment of thinking that they're killing themselves irony. In this moment of tragic romance, you know, kind of thing. where they literally die exactly how they said that they wanted to die. They chose it. And then it turns out that the people in suits who were knocking at the door literally just, leave. Whereas if they were the FBI, they would have just literally like fucking broke in.
It's so I think it's so funny, and it is very ironic, and it's also like it's so much sadder even than the Troy scene to me when they die, because it's like they're escaped, and obviously they can't go to Mexico because they don't have the money, and Troy's gone, but like they're still in Orange County. They're in some random suburban house, and even though it's not the FBI, it is just like more of, I think, the noise that they see in the rest of the town, the society. Like it is just two random normal people who are trying to sell them something. Admittedly, it's religion in this context, but they're still trying to sell them something, and they're still trying to invade their space with their lack of rebellious spirit of the normalcy. And I think that that's what really makes the ending hit me so hard, is this idea that even though it's not the FBI, like they know they weren't going to last. They chose to kill themselves, but no matter what, they have chosen to not be made for this world that's constantly encroaching.
Definitely. Yeah, it's really that ending definitely really hit me. And it's interesting again because at a certain point you're watching these kids like do genuinely like psychotic behavior, but the way that you're made the entire step of the way to understand that like this is more freeing and a better option to them than the sort of like the repressive, very ugly aspects of suburbia that they're kind of fighting against. And to watch where that ends up for them, it's really brutal because, as we kind of mentioned, it shows that sort of limit of what is possible for them to do. If these were people with more money, they probably wouldn't have done any of this stuff. That literally this was their option to exercise power and control and to transgress against the system. Like that's literally the options that they were given. And then when you kind of click that in with the sort of tragicomedy of everything that takes place and where they end up going, it's really brutal and really sad. But pivoting towards, I think, reductive rating round on this one. This one gets the Jamie 4 from me, which is a very specific kind of 4 I'm sure many are familiar with now, but it's like it's like I've almost convinced myself of the 5 talking about the film. Right. I think I want to give it another watch before I do that, but like this was really, really close for me because I think that this, Seeds, I think is really, really well done and is in a different way. And I think that there was something that did speak to me a little bit more about, again, that mixing of the grotesque reality versus, sort of like the fantasy aspect of it. And I felt like that contradiction, and the way that it's applied throughout the entire film ended up, really getting me in the gut kind of, a little bit there. So, I think that this is like a really incredible shot on video film. It's definitely up there with Red Spirit Lake as like definitely my favorite shot on video film that I've seen. And this might even, I'd have to rewatch both, but I might have even preferred this in just the drama of it. I think Red Spirit Lake tops it in terms of, some of the surreal deaths and things that take place in that film. But this is going for something a lot more moving, I think, and I think it's quite successful and very well written. That's not something I think most people attribute to shot on video films. I think that it's very clear that James Robert Baker would go on to be a novelist. He seems like a very, very good writer, and this is an incredible domestic satire, as well as being like a genuinely romantic teen rebels on the run and a really misanthropic and grotesque sort of like crime movie. Again, a movie where two lovers embrace as the camera twirls around them on the beach, and the voiceover is describing putting clutches up people's asses and yanking it so their guts come out like a piñata. Like that's just filthy, no budget, genre greatness, and it's very punk and it's very filthy, but it also has a heart to it, which is not something that you might always get from this kind of film. And I think that it's a perfect combination of, maybe reductive, maybe going Ehrlich mode a little bit, but like, it's got that Terrence Malick Badlands, but it's also got a little bit of that, that dirt cheap satire of like something like John Waters. I thought of Female Trouble a little bit watching this, even though, I found this even more moving than that. I think that, there's something so tragic and so, something that James Robert Baker very clearly feels in these characters, this sense of limitation that he can't overcome. Despite this being directed by quote unquote the world's angriest gay man, I thought I found it a lot more strangely poetic and moving. than something like Seeds, which felt very righteously angry in a way, but definitely to a more I don't even want to say brutal end, but to a more hopeless end, I guess. And I can't even say that this has a hopeful ending or anything. I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say.
But at least there's
a very feels like there's more rage in Seeds.
And at least there's some happiness in this movie as well, right? Rage is.
I guess that's it. Yeah, like there are fleeting moments of things going right for these people and like positive emotional experiences, even though but that's just it. Is it's ones that they force, ones that they force
and
to.
It's still
to
wrapped
make
in like
do.
naivete and this like I don't know just ignorance a little bit.
That's a great word for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have much to add, but I will say I think this is one of the funniest films that we've covered. I mean, honestly, the line after line, I was howling. I thought this was
it's not too often
really
we spend most
funny.
of the review quoting the film.
Yeah, like every line and every scene has something that's quotable in it. So I mean, just on a writing standpoint, I think this is fantastic. And then just to add from that kind of comedy, he has a lot of just ironic, really dark irony that wraps around that comedy that I really appreciate. And I gotta say, Sarah Lee Wade I think is fantastic. I mean, everyone really does a good job in this, but I did think that Sarah Lee Wade and I think it's Linda Miller who plays the stepmom really shine in this. I love Sarah Lee Wade's like. Just her very calm demeanor as she's going through all of these things, and
she's just adorable.
Yeah. Even when she's saying completely absurd lines, there's like something innocent and adorable about it in some form. And then with Linda Miller, she's just this like over the top, Christian woman that is saying all these like you're a repugnant sinner and all that, and she's just very cartoonish, but in a great way. So I really appreciated specifically those two performances. But yeah, this was fantastic. One thing I just wanted to read because it was in the credits, and for some reason it spoke to me. I don't know if
it spoke
this
with me
is
too.
like,
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, it's like it said Blonde Death theme. It must be like a poem or something. I'm not sure, but I'm just going to read it. It says, "You stupid asshole. They saved Hitler's cock. Not of this earth. My old man's a fatso." And that, I don't know why that
by the
spoke
angry
to me.
Samoans.
Yeah, that really spoke to me. So I wrote it down, and I love it.
Because I think that's supposed to be the name of the theme song. Like, is that what it was supposed to be in the credits?
Yeah, and I think the Angry Samoans were a punk band at the time, I think.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah.
That's what I thought. So that's
Those
the
are
title of the
incredible.
song, and it's by the Angry Samoans.
I want that to be like just song lyrics in some song. I just think that it's so punk rock and hilarious, and it really, oddly enough, it does relate really well to everything that we've seen in this film. So yeah, I wanted to read that, but 4 out of 5 for now. This thing's awesome. Check it out.
I have to go with the normal 5. I love this movie. I think it's a really cliche, man. We've already talked about most of the reasons that I think it's great. But I'll just say that like when I watched it the other day, rewatched it the other day, I very soon after I went and I listened to More Than This, the Roxy Music song, and I was just like vibing, and like that was what I was kind of thinking of this watch. Like I was really tuned into like the romance of it and the tragedy of it that Baker manages to find underneath all the absurdity and the craziness and the violence. Like I really do think this movie is, as you both said, is so funny, but it really does hit the emotional beats as well. And if you like this movie, I really recommend his books. I've only read 2 of them, but both of them were just absolutely mind-blowing. Boy Wonder is a really good starter point. That's as I said, the satire of Hollywood, the oral history of Shark Traeger, like a new Hollywood producer. Just imagine like an alternate history of like all the worst shit that happened in Hollywood in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
That sounds amazing.
It's so funny. It's so good. Really, it begs to be turned into a miniseries, but if it is, it'll be censored out the wazoo. But and then Tim and Pete as well. His last book published while he was alive is much more of a slow burn and much more like a low, like lighter key tone. But I think about it often and the way that it kind of uses its own romantic framework to build this sense of like rageful, like ideological rebellion. I mean, that book has a scene where a guy gets like heroin injected into like the big vein on his cock while they're having sex, and then at the end it ends with people like sleeping soundly while someone related to Reagan is being potentially murdered. Love 5 stars. 5 stars for James Robert Baker as well.
Oh man, yeah, he sounds awesome.
Hell yeah. Well, I think that will wrap it up for everything this week. That was Seeds from 1968 and Blonde Death 1984. Thanks so much, Kai, for finally joining us and for bringing these films with you.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
No problem. If you've got anything to plug while you're here, this is usually where we have you do that.
I can do some plugs. Yeah, you can follow me on Letterboxd, just my name, so Kai Perrignon. I'm at Memory Endowment on Twitter. Sorry, I don't like my handle, but it's too late. If you follow me, I've got a few things potentially coming up. And when you're talking about Charles Pinion earlier, I interviewed Charles Pinion like about his whole career last year, and that will be online soon. I just gotta get on to someone about it, but it's nearly on YouTube, so I'll post it on my Twitter soon. I'm also working on a film. If puppets necrophiliac anti-romance sounds appealing to you, well, that should be coming up. If Setback or 7 Ahead should be coming the next year or so. So if something around
it absolutely
those,
does.
Then you'll see my Twitter or my Letterboxd, and you will see me beg people to watch it. And then finally, I don't know when this episode is airing, but I do some programming stuff with Static Vision in Australia. They have a festival coming up very soon on the 15th called Dreamscapes in Melbourne, but they do streaming stuff all the time, and they're hopefully and probably going to do some more theater stuff later in the year in Melbourne and Sydney. So if you just want to follow Static Vision AU on Twitter or Letterboxd, they are always doing really interesting stuff, getting filmmakers. Last year they got Paul Schrader, as I said, Charles Pinion with Cecilia Condit. I interviewed Chester Novel Turner of Black Devil Doll from Hell with them last year as well. So they're always doing stuff, and they always got some interesting things coming up. Otherwise, yeah, thank you so much for having me on, fellas.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
This was awesome. I haven't got to read your Book of Avon short story yet. But I'm excited to get around to that.
Yeah.
Do you have more? Do you have more writing on the way?
Yes, I forgot about. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I'm in the Book of Avon that Terry Rowland and Astrid Rose edited. Yeah, I have a little short story there, which is anyone who's from Knoxville, Tennessee, will not like how I've depicted Tennessee, but whatever. I'm always kind of stuff. I mean, if you are a publisher in the audience, I have 2 novels that I've written, and hit me up. But yeah, more stuff in the future, hopefully and presumably, because I'm always working on things.
Awesome.
Very cool. Very cool. We'll definitely look forward to all of that. For our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time, where we are, for the first time in, I guess, over a year, we are timing an episode to the release of a new film. So if that is nature is healing, as people like to say. That is what's happening here. We are going to do a themed episode around a little filmmaker some of you might know called M. Night Shyamalan. He's got a new film called Old coming out. By the time you guys are listening to this, I think it comes out next week. So in time for his new movie to come out, we are going to go back to his OG classics, get familiar with him. We are going to talk about Sixth Sense, and we are going to talk about Unbreakable, which I don't think need any sort of introduction. I think most people are familiar, but we haven't talked about M. Night before, so I'm excited to kind of... I think after we finish watching those, I'm going to do a full revisit of M. Night, including the one I have not seen, which is Last Airbender.
That's the one I haven't seen.
I still haven't seen Lady in the Water
the only one
or Last Airbender. I haven't seen either of those.
Okay.
Lady in the Water
I remember liking.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to like it more than people say. It has a bad reputation, but a lot of his films now do, and I like him, so I feel like I'll enjoy it.
I did a rewatch of a few of his
Yeah.
movies earlier in the year, and it just totally blew me away. What a filmmaker! I mean, even Lady in the
he's
Water
great.
looks. It's shot by Christopher Doyle. Looks amazing, and he's just very fascinating. And Split is so much grosser than it needs to be, and I really respect that.
Yeah, Split's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've I guess on the bonus transmission series, for anyone who listens to the bonus transmissions, we've definitely, I don't think we talked about Split, but I think we talked about Glass.
Yeah,
so
we did
we've
talk about
definitely
Glass.
briefly flirted with M. Night, but we're going to do a full deep dive next week over on the Patreon. We're going to do Sixth Sense Unbreakable, and then the week after, for the free listeners, there is another new release. So we're doing two. I didn't even know this, but we are doing. I didn't realize 2 in a row. But yeah, we're doing another timed release. But this time there is a little film coming out on Netflix starring an actor some of you might be familiar with, Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Hell yeah.
So we thought, well, it's time. We should do. We've talked about Van Damme a couple times. I think we talked about him on the Albert Pion episode where we talked about Cyborg, and we mentioned him on the Universal Soldier during Dolph Month where we talked about Universal Soldier. So he's come up, sporadically a couple times, but we've never done a Van Damme episode. So in 2 weeks' time, for all listeners, we're going to talk about Hard Target, John Woo, and we're going to talk about Double Team, Choi Hark.
Oh. So stoked.
Which is going to be a really, really fun episode, and we have a very special guest joining us to talk about the Van Damme goodness. But yeah, we're going to be talking about him working with, overseas filmmakers for American action films in very, very crazy action films, we'll say. Because we've talked about John Woo and we've talked about Choi Hark, but we haven't done much of their American stuff. Choi Hark we've only talked about for the Once Upon a Time in China, and for John Woo, we've mostly done The Killer and Hard Target. I think I think we did Mission Impossible 2 really early on, and I guess Blackjack, which we just recently did with the.
I guess we've done more than I thought. But
yeah, we've done a couple more John Woos. We just haven't hit his really big American stuff like Face Off or Broken Arrow or anything like that.
Exactly.
So or Hard Target, which we're finally doing. So
very stoked.
We're going to talk about John Woo coming over to America. But yeah, so that's what you guys can expect for the episode in 2 weeks' time. Until then. Keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.